Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto got harem with Hinata Ino Anko Temari and Fem. Haku, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. It was a clear night in Konohagakure, the shinobi village in service to the Land of Fire, one of the 5 major elemental nations ruling the large continent. Arguably the most powerful of the 5 great hidden villages, Konoha endured and survived attacks from the others and their allied minor villages in 3 separate large-scale conflicts called the Great Shinobi Wars. Even more impressive, they came out among the decisive victors in each of those wars. Thanks to the powerful, and somewhat eccentric, shinobi in service to the village that helped secure those victories, it was a quiet and peaceful night for citizens of Konoha without any fear of unprovoked attacks from outside forces. Despite that, members of the Uchiha police force were diligently keeping the peace with their silent patrols on the streets and rooftops. In addition, the Special Operations Force Anbu, while unseen, also watched for any danger from the shadows. All whispered conversations in the shadows and drunken mumbles from a few stragglers ceased abruptly when they all sensed a growing presence in the air. Glancing up from whatever they were doing, they noted a lone old man walking down a dirty and poorly maintained street, a good sign that he was in one of the poorer parts of Konoha. He looked as if he already had a particular destination in mind, with his wizened face set in stone and his dark eyes never wavering. 4 Anbu were easily keeping pace with the old-looking man from the rooftops, slipping between shadows silently and unseen. It wasn't because they considered this man a threat like one might think. Instead, they would give their lives to protect him from any slightest indication of danger coming from any direction. This village leader, and the powerful commander of its military, was known as Sarutobi Hiruzen, or the 3rd Hokage. His large white haori with red accents flared out at the bottom as he walked, more like glided, silently down the street toward an old and decrepit apartment building. He stopped in front of its entrance gate for a moment, and shifted the front brim of his large and iconic conical Hokage hat up to glance at the fresh graffiti covering the front of the building and its perimeter wall. He sighed despairingly as he stroked his graying pointed goatee and read over the painted text. Die, demon, and go away, monster, were some of the kinder words he made out. It's already been years since the Kyuubi attack. Why do the people of this village still carry so much hatred? He thought angrily as he almost forced the creaky old front gate off its hinges, opening it, and continued onward into the building. The 4 Anbu guarding him split up, with 2 going inside after him in almost invisible blurs while the other 2 took up vantage points on the rooftop. After making his way up several flights of stairs to the top floor, he arrived at the door to the apartment belonging to one Uzumaki Naruto. The young boy was living here by himself, ever since he was forced out of the orphanage last year, and the 3rd had to give him a place to live in since no one were able to adopt him due to politics involved. As soon as he moved in, the tenants all immediately moved out, even the landlord. In all senses, it was an abandoned building slowly falling into disrepair. Only the occasional genin team hired by the 3rd himself to do maintenance on the building barely kept it from being unsafe to live in for the young boy. He raised his hand to knock on the door, having come here to check in on Naruto and hand him an envelope holding this month's allowance. Waiting patiently as the knocking echoed almost forebodingly throughout the hallway, the Hokage's thoughts began going over what had been happening to this child, not for the first time, and certainly not the last time. He couldn't help but blame himself for not being able to save his former successor, the 4th Hokage Minato Namikaze, from sacrificing himself to seal the Kyuubi into his own newborn son, Naruto, during that disaster on October 10 so long ago. Naruto's mother, Kushina Uzumaki, who was already fatally wounded from when the Kyuubi inexplicitly broke out of her seal while giving birth, sacrificed herself holding the demon fox down with her unique chakra chain jutsu to help her husband complete the sealing process. If only Hiruzen had managed to get there before the fourth Shiki Fuijin sealing ritual took place, he would have gladly taken Minato's place in the Shinigami's stomach. That would have at least allowed the young man to live in order to be able to take care of his son and protect him from those who resented his Jinchuriki status. Instead, after the deaths of Minato and Kushina, Hiruzen, even as he mourned his beloved wife's death, was forced to come out of retirement and retake the Hokage hat until another suitable replacement could be found. Somewhat regretfully, he was also forced to keep Naruto's parentage a secret, even from the child himself. Iwagakure in Land of Earth would have likely attempted to kill any offspring of Minato Namikaze, the man who single-handedly decimated a large portion of its army in one battle with his deadly techniques in the last Great Shinobi War. That would include sending assassins after an infant. The Hokage could not risk that with his village still recovering its shinobi force from the war and the Kyuubi's destruction, at least until Naruto himself grew up to be strong enough to defend himself from most adversaries. Unfortunately, due to his parentage being secret and having to be hidden among Konoha's many orphans as a legitimate ward of the village's civilian council, this left him alone to face the coming animosity. When it was leaked that the Kyuubi was sealed into this young boy, most of the village believed him to be a true reincarnation of the monster itself instead of being its container. The Hokage and many other respected shinobi did try to stem the coming storm by publicly announcing that Naruto was just a human child who had the misfortune of being chosen to carry a heavy burden. For that, he should have been viewed as a hero. The villagers, in their grief and hatred over losing their beloved fourth Hokage and many of their loved ones, ignored their pleading and tried to openly attack and kill the infant anyway. After seeing his Anbu stop so many attempts, the third became angry and passed a law forbidding any talk of Naruto being the Kyuubi container on pain of death. He hoped that the hatred would not be passed down to the child's own generation at least, though he knew that was a fool's hope at best. In the years since the attack, quite a few shinobi, like the Yamanaka clan head and the famous Hitaki Kakashi of the Sharingan, found themselves blocked in every attempt to take Naruto in thanks to the village council making it a mission to put up impassable red tapes in order to keep the child isolated as much as possible. Blinded by their hatred toward the Kyuubi, the civilian council refused to believe the child could not be the demon fox and kept finding ways to discreetly have their ward die early without intervention from the Hokage. They began by denying him even the basic necessaries of life by often having him kicked out of stores and restaurants and overcharging him for anything, even expired food. It was only luck that there were no attempts to attack Naruto outright due to the Anbu standing guard around him in the shadows almost all the time. The old man had to allow a small smile as he remembered how his most powerful, and rather antisocial, Anbu, recently promoted to commander, was quite protective of the cute and innocent infant back then. The Hokage, in all his power, could not do much as there weren't any evidence that the council was going behind his back. Instead, he could only watch over Naruto from afar as the child continued to be more isolated from everyone in the village. Even the children his age avoided him due to their parents warning them to stay away from him without any explanation. The old man was brought out of his grim thoughts by the cold silence that followed his knocking. It unnerved him somewhat, since he felt this wasn't due to the stillness of an empty apartment. His shinobi senses, refined by age and experience, told him this was unnatural. To confirm, he waved a hand and two Anbu seemed to melt out of the walls on both sides of the door. They immediately went down to one knee where they stood in salutation to their leader. Has Naruto-kun left the apartment at any time tonight? Hiruzen asked the dog-masked Anbu with gravity-defying silver hair kneeling to his right. This particular Anbu captain was called Inu or, more famously, Hitaki Kakashi of the Sharingan whenever he wasn't wearing his Anbu mask. No, Hokage-sama. He entered the apartment mid-afternoon and hadn't left since. Before that, we followed him through his usual routine. Aside from eating lunch at Ichiraku Ramen, nothing of interest happened today. Inu replied quickly. The Hokage seemed to contemplate this for a moment before the Anbu added. But, he seemed out of it. I think he's depressed. A small shiver went down the third spine at this observation, and one thought went through his mind out of instinct. It couldn't be. It should be impossible for a young child to think about that. He immediately pointed his index finger at the door, and 4 Anbu, the 2 guarding Naruto plus the 2 that followed the Hokage into the building, quickly surrounded the door with 2 on each side. Inu, on the right side, picked the lock almost instantly and slowly opened the door. When it tapped fully open against the wall, all 4 masked shinobi quickly zipped into the apartment with a textbook criss-cross entry procedure. The Hokage, walking calmly but decisively, then immediately followed them in. The first thing he noticed was the deep darkness and the unnatural quietness permeating throughout the entire apartment. Even if Naruto was sleeping, shallow breathing should have been heard at least. Inu and his partner were standing in the unlit kitchen to the left, and the other 2 Anbu took positions in the empty living room to the right. After a quick scan, all 5 noted some dim light leaking out from under the door to the bathroom down the hallway opposite from the entrance. The third desperately hoped that the young child was just taking a bath and ended up falling asleep. Inu shattered that hope into a million pieces. Hokage-sama, I smell blood. So much of it, he whispered haltingly with his uncovered eye widening behind his Anbu mask. Not wasting any time, the third, with speed not seen by any for years, blurred to the locked bathroom door and, using nothing but his natural strength, easily ripped it off the frame with a thunderous crack of its cheap plywood construction around the hinges. Tossing the door aside with the Anbu immediately moving up behind him, Hiruzen prepared himself for what was beyond, and still could not contain his shock. Blood. If one had to describe the horrific sight the Hokage and the Anbu saw in the tiny bathroom in one word, it was simply that. There was so much of that viscous life-giving liquid covering nearly every inch of this enclosed space in large splatters and blots. The cheap tiled floor was covered wall to wall with a thin sheen of bright red color, because the water overflowing from the bathtub diluted the blood. Also, next to the tub laid a rusty and chipped kunai, apparently discarded by a random shinobi long ago. It was nearly covered handle to pointed tip in that viscous liquid as well. It was at this moment that the third made the grisly discovery. A blood-soaked blonde boy was slumped down in the tiny bathtub filled to the brim with red water. His eyes were closed and his face was deathly pale with shallow cheeks. His left arm was sticking out over the edge of the tub, his limp hand hovering over exactly where the rusty kunai was located. The last thing to hit everyone was the putrid metallic smell of dried blood in this tiny space. The third had to choke back some vomit, and it was only thanks to his years of seeing death and gore on the battlefield. One Anbu with him wasn't as steeled against this sight and smell, and immediately took his mask off to vomit his last meal onto the hallway floor. Inu slowly removed his mask, revealing one wide eye and his mouth obviously gaped behind his face mask. He became still and unable to speak, not believing the sight. The last 2 Anbu stepped back in shock and had to turn away. They were all used to seeing this kind of scenes involving adults, not a child so young like Naruto. Snapping out of his shock, the Hokage quickly moved to Naruto's still body and scooped him out of the bathtub, getting blood everywhere on his white and red haori, not that he even bothered caring. He cradled the small and fragile body to his chest as he checked for a pulse. It felt like an eternity as he held his breath until he finally found one tiny heartbeat, but it was barely there. He then quickly searched for any cut on the neck or the arms to stop the bleeding. To his surprise there were none, not even a scar. Why? A small and weak voice barely reached Hirsuan's ears. The old man immediately stopped his frantic checking and looked at Naruto's face. What he saw broke his heart. Coldness, despair, and crushing emptiness were all he saw in this child's half-open eyes. Why didn't I die? I wanted to. The pale boy managed to whisper out. Hiruzen began to tremble, and he had to allow some tears out as he clutched the fragile boy tighter to his chest. His four Anbu couldn't stand to watch this and went off to pretend to check the surroundings while dealing with their own emotions. Naruto-kun, you need to tell me why you did this, the suddenly frail old man choked out. I'm tired of not being seen. I want to exist. Naruto tiredly whispered out before breaking down, sobbing softly with an anguished expression. Each rack of the boy's sobbing form was like a knife stabbing directly into Hiruzen's heart. I see cut my wrists, F4 times. Every time, I go to sleep, but I still wake up, with no C cut. It must have been the Kyuubi's chakra. How ironic. Your curse, saving your life. The Hokage thought sadly as he watched Naruto slowly fade away into unconsciousness, now completely exhausted. At this point, he finally stood up, carefully wrapped up the boy with his ruined haori, and quickly carried him out of the apartment. He then made a beeline for the hospital with his best speed, and Inu was hot on his heels while the other Anbu remained behind to clean up and try to get over what they just saw. Next day at the hospital, the Hokage marched into the front lobby of the hospital with a tall Junin by his side, both carrying grim expressions on their faces. This new man wore a regular Konoha Junin outfit, with a heavy green long-sleeved shirt and a loose red cloth vest layered over the flak vest being the only variations. The Hittite was displayed on his forehead with clear pride, and he had his long dirty blonde hair tied into a high ponytail. His pale blue pupilless eyes displayed determination, but also some worry. The receptionist gasped and stood to greet them with a nervous expression. A stern hand gesture from the third implied no greeting was necessary as the two men walked past the stunned woman to the stairwell. Upon arriving at the correct floor, they continued briskly to Naruto's room that was currently under heavy watch with two guards at the door and an Anbu hidden in the ceiling inside the room. The Hokage immediately dismissed the guards with a gesture. As they entered the room, he then waved his hand to allow the Anbu to appear from the ceiling. It turned out to be Inu. Glancing at each other briefly, all three men then had a quick look at Naruto in his hospital bed. He still looked pale and unconscious. A small and pained intake of breath from the new man was the only sound anyone made. While the blonde Junin stood still staring almost despairingly at the patient, Inu and the Hokage immediately set to putting up several security seals around the room. After a moment of tense silence, the Hokage finally spoke up. Yamanaka Inoichi, what happens here never gets past these four walls. Is that understood? The answer was a grim nod from the now identified head of the Yamanaka clan, and one of the top experts in mind arts. Now, I wish to thank you for discreetly taking care of the Anbu who were with us, as well the doctor who was here last night. I doubt they would miss the memories anyway, and we absolutely have to keep this to as few people as possible, the Hokage offered with a sad smile. I wouldn't want to remember this either if I had a choice, Hokage-sama. To think this child is the same age as my daughter. Inoichi trailed off as he stared sadly at the feeble blonde boy sleeping peacefully in the bed. This was the child he and his wife wanted to adopt since birth. He felt red-hot anger flare up inside against this village's civilians for impeding them so much, and had to work to remain calm. The third nodded before turning toward Inu. Inu, would you like to have your memory from last night altered? The Anbu slowly took his dog mask off to reveal a man with one lazy-looking eye, the other was covered by a small black eye patch designed to fit inside his Anbu mask. A dark blue spandex face mask covered the bottom half of his face all the way up to his nose. Hitaki Kakashi shook his head in response. No, I need to remember this, Hokage-sama. It'll encourage me to make sure he's better protected from now on. He replied in an unusually serious tone for anyone that knew him personally. The third nodded again with a sad smile before turning back to Inoichi. Inoichi-san, as we have discussed before, I would like for you to go into Naruto-kun's mind and completely remove any trance of the past 48 hours from his memories. Then go back to the time he just left the orphanage and work from there to the present, altering some events he encountered in subtle ways that may help him feel a little better about himself. Even random acts of kindness from non-existent strangers will help. As for why he ended up here, an accident involving him hitting his head should work and explain the foggy memories he may have after this. If you wish to object about any ethical issue with this, now is the time to do it, and I will note it in the report that I'm making for Hokage's eyes only. Inoichi shook his head. How could he object to this? No child should ever have to think about committing suicide. He then walked over to Naruto's bedside and pulled up a chair so he could sit comfortably as he dived into the boy's mind. Upon reaching up to the boy's forehead with his hand, the Hokage decided to give the clan head a warning. Be careful, only Minato-kun knew exactly how the Kyuubi's seal works, and you may encounter the beast in there. If you do, give it a wide berth and try your best to fix the memories. It should not be able to harm you, but it may attempt to speak to you. Be wary of it. Inoichi only hesitated for half a second before touching his hand to the boy's forehead. The closing of his eyes and slight slumping of his shoulders were the only signs he had successfully entered Naruto's mind. The Hokage sighed as he sat in another chair. I hope this works, he mumbled as he and Kakashi watched over the two blondes. 2 hours later, Inoichi blinked awake as he removed his hand from Naruto's forehead. The Hokage and Kakashi looked up at this movement, and they were surprised to see the blonde Junin shoot up out of his seat with his body trembling from unbridled rage. How dare they? He growled out quietly before exploding. Those bastards! How dare they? He roared before slamming a fist on a nearby wall, cracking it a little. Afterward, he had to work to regain control and managed to calm down a little. The Hokage and Kakashi were stunned to see the normally calm clan head fly off the handle like this. They decided to give the blonde a minute to calm down more. Did you see anything notable? Hiruzen finally inquired after an eternity of tense silence. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, Hokage-sama. Inoichi bit out. This odd statement confused the other men. That's the thing. This young child was never attacked. The worst they ever did physically were selling him bad food and throwing him out of stores and restaurants. Apparently they didn't see the point of directly harming him since it would most likely mean their death due to your law. The Hokage nodded for the blonde to continue. Inoichi let out a pain-filled sigh as he stared down at the unconscious Naruto with trembling eyes. They just acted like he didn't exist. They ignored him and cursed him anywhere he went. The only times he actually got positive attention was whenever he saw you or ate ramen with a middle-aged man and his daughter. He has been dealing with that ever since the first memory he could remember. I wonder which is worse, physical harm or having your entire existence cursed and denied anywhere you went. The Hokage's expression slowly became grim as he began to understand what the clan head was getting at. Kakashi was now glaring intensely at a particular spot on a wall. After a moment of silence, the third finally spoke up. Do you think you did enough alternations that his mental state might be improved after this? It's hard to say, but in my study of his mind, he was so desperate for attention that a single encounter with a kind stranger boosted his belief in his existence exponentially. I created and scattered several encounters like that throughout the past year and altered some of the negative events he encountered to have somewhat better outcomes. I even put myself in one of the new memories so he would feel comfortable talking to me if he sees me again around this village. I will likely introduce my daughter to him to be friends at that point. The civilians will object to seeing these two together, the third stated calmly. They all can go to hell for all I care. Inoichi snarled in response, before taking a breath to continue calmly. My wife and I have allowed ourselves to be pushed around by them and their red tapes whenever we tried to adopt young Naruto. We've dealt with it long enough, and if we cannot go that route, then we will involve ourselves in his life another way. It's not like they can legitimately order Inohime to not be friends with him. The Hokage nodded in response. I couldn't agree more. I will support you and whoever goes this route fully. Did you do anything more in his mind? I couldn't because I'm sure he'd notice. I believe when he wakes up, he should be in a better mood. Even then, I still hope he will become friends with my daughter and the others. That will go a long way toward validating his belief in his existence. Inoichi spoke in an analytical tone. Very good, what about the Kyuubi? Did you encounter it? No, Hokage-sama. I easily felt its presence in the mindscape, but Naruto's memories were located far away from the Kyuubi, so I was able to work unimpeded. Inoichi replied with apparent relief. Good. The fourth did an excellent job with the seal then. Now, I need you two to understand why none of this leaves the room. The Hokage began with a firm gaze at the two men before continuing. If news of this got back to those who are still angry about the Kyuubi, they will believe whatever they were doing was working and will intensify their efforts, making this worse and isolating him even more. I do not want to see a repeat of what I've seen the night before. Naruto-kun and suicide should not exist together in the same sentence. I know you believe this as well. The other two men nodded in firm agreement. The third sighed before putting his hand up in a half-ram seal and whispering, "Kai," to release the security seals in the room. Inoichi slowly rubbed his palm on the young blonde boy's forehead with a sad expression before it changed to one of full-on determination. He then excused himself to leave. Kakashi, sensing that Naruto was coming out of his sleep, decided to put his dog mask back on and return to his hidden position on the ceiling. Hiruzen calmly straightened out his Hokage outfit a little bit before taking a seat next to the bed. It wasn't long before the young blonde began to stir and yawn, as if he was waking up from a long and fulfilling night of sleep. The other two occupants of this room immediately noticed the changes in the little boy's cerulean blue eyes. They weren't as empty or soulless as before. They showed some of their usual brightness with some visible confusion as the boy took in his surroundings. Hokage Gigi, Naruto muttered in surprise as he saw the third and then surveyed the hospital room with a confused pout. What am I doing here? Did something happen? Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage known as the famed god of shinobi, and the professor, was suddenly stumped and silently cursed his stupidity at forgetting to ask Inoichi for details regarding the supposed accident that had the boy land in the hospital. He heard the tiniest bit of snickering and glanced menacingly in the direction of the hidden Kakashi. The corners of his lips barely twitched upward when he heard a gulp. He still got it. Naruto-kun, I'm glad you're okay, and you're in the hospital. I was told you were admitted here unconscious after you hit your head. What was the last thing that you remember? He tried to fish the fake event out without suspicion. He saw Kakashi shrug and did a so gesture with his hand out the corner of his eyes. He frowned in slight offense. Maybe he should make the one-eyed Anbu a sensei for 3 brats as punishment. While the old man was contemplating unfair punishments, young Naruto was concentrating to remember what happened. I was walking through the park and I saw a girl trying to climb a tree. Naruto muttered as he continued to work through the fogginess in his head. All I could remember about her was that she had long brown hair. I didn't even see her face. I was watching her and she suddenly screamed and slipped off. I ran toward her and tried to save her. I guess I hit my head when I jumped under her because that was the last thing I remember. The Hokage nodded empathically while inside he was considering giving Inoichi more pay for this. A brown-haired girl in this village. Needle in a haystack. Still, he'd make sure the boy wouldn't needlessly look for the girl. That's right, Naruto-kun. That child and her father brought you in asking for you to be admitted. That was 2 days ago and you have been sleeping since then. That was a rather nasty lump you had on your head. The Hokage continued to spin off the event. He saw Naruto brighten up considerably at this act of kindness, which made his heart clench painfully. Just how deep was his need to be acknowledged? Is she still around? The child inquired hopefully. Unfortunately, not anymore. Hiruzen's heart almost broke at the boy's visible disappointment before he quickly continued. It turns out she's the daughter of a traveling merchant and they have left the village. She was playing in that park to pass the time while her father did some business. She did leave the staff a message to pass on to you, however. Naruto perked his head up, waiting to hear the message. She wanted to thank you for saving her, and that she hopes to see you again eventually, the Hokage said with a warm smile. Naruto's smile was enough to brighten up the room. The third saw Kakashi give a thumb up for his acting. Maybe he'd put off making the Junin a sensei for a while longer. Now, Naruto-kun, you get some rest and I have to get back to my duties. You will be released tomorrow morning. Get some sleep in the meantime, all right. The third stood up, getting ready to leave. Naruto gave an enthusiastic nod, his smile still plastered on his face as the old man stepped out and closed the door. Kakashi immediately appeared at his side. Keep an eye on Naruto-kun and let me know of any change. In the meantime, make a list of the stores and restaurants that kicked him out or overcharged him. I will personally take care of them. We're going to make sure things improve, if only a little, for him from here on, the Hokage dictated to the Anbu. The dog-masked man nodded as he took an orange book out of nowhere to begin reading it. The third suddenly put on a grin with a small blush on his cheeks. So, you get to that part with Amy-chan yet? Kakashi let out a perverted giggle. That was the best so far, Hokage-sama. I wonder how Jiraiya-sama got the research material for that. Suddenly, the temperature in the hallway chilled a few degrees. Both men note this and looked around to see several angry female nurses and patients glaring at them as if they wanted them to combust on the spot. The two men gulped and quickly shunshined out, lest they suffer the women's wrath. Back in Naruto's room, the still smiling boy let out a long sigh as he watched the Hokage close the door. His fake smile faded like a wisp from his face as he leaned back into his bed. He could feel his crushing depression and shame crash over him like waves. Sorry, whatever you did in my head, I still remember everything. It didn't work and this still hurts so much. The blonde boy trailed off, with his bright blue eyes dulling to near darkness as he curled into a ball and began shaking with silent sobs. Soon at Yamanaka Flowers, Inoichi let out a weary sigh as he took his shoes off in the entranceway of his home. A beautiful brown-haired woman with almost gem-like hazel eyes appeared to greet her husband with a chaste kiss. How was your day, darling? They called you away so suddenly. Yamanaka Kana asked with some concern at her husband's bedraggled expression. I can't tell you since Hokage-sama declared this a village secret. I'm sorry, my Haim. Kana nodded in understanding, knowing this was quite serious. Inoichi's expression then turned determined. However, whatever happened today has finally convinced me to get off my and really do something about our blonde comrade, he said resolutely. Since there were so few blondes in this village with many coming from their clan, Kana and Inoichi took to calling Uzumaki Naruto their blonde comrade. It was one of their favorite inside jokes. Kana was surprised to hear this and frowned. She was sharp enough to know this secret had something to do with Naruto if Inoichi just brought him up out of the blue, and that it was bad enough to shake her usually composed husband up. She was coming to many conclusions, all of which she didn't like at all. How? The morons running that orphan's office have blocked us at every avenue whenever we tried to adopt him. If only Hokage-sama would just use his power to force it through. You know as well I do that if he did that, then his political enemies will use this to go to the fire daimyo and raise a stink. The Hokage may be in charge of the village, but the daimyo still carry more power than him. He's also a civilian and will likely side with those bastards if they present a convincing argument. All this will result in his Hokage-sama losing political credibility and power. As much as I want to do something for young Naruto, we can't risk this with that old war hawk Danzo chomping at every bit. Politics. Kana spat out quietly with a nasty scowl, irritated enough to curse. Inoichi smiled and put his hands on her shoulders to kiss her forehead, getting a pleased hum out of her. All we can do is bide our time and wait for the opportune moment. Shikaku and Shuza definitely do not like this either, and neither does most of the other clan heads, too, he muttered before smirking ferally. Which is why when the moment comes, and we'll attack ferociously. Danzo and the others will not be able to do anything, and they'll be lame ducks before long. Kana grinned devilishly and hugged her darling tightly around his waist. You know that kind of talk is a big turn on for me, she murmured lowly before kissing him softly. In the meantime, the adoption route isn't working. We'll have to go another way, the blonde man declared as he moved out of the embrace and stepped into the living room. What are you thinking? The brunette asked softly at his side and saw that he was gazing lovingly at the living room's large bay window overlooking the street in front of their ground floor flower shop. Sitting on its cushioned surface was an adorable young girl with shoulder-length pale blonde hair staring out at a lone cloud high in the clear blue sky. She was swaying her head gently side to side and humming a nonsensical but happy-sounding tune. Friendship, Inoichi declared quietly with a prideful expression he reserved only for their beloved daughter. Kana grinned even more devilishly than just a moment ago as she hugged her darling's right arm tightly to her ample chest. That brain of yours is why I married you, my darling, she whispered into his ear seductively. Her husband grinned roguishly down at her, making her shiver with excitement. Only that, my beautiful Haim. I suppose your devastatingly handsome looks and wonderful personality are nice bonuses too. They chuckled, getting one young Yamanaka Ino to stop her humming and turn her head to find her parents standing in the living room's doorway staring and smiling at each other in a way that usually resulted in her having to leave the room for some reason. The cute blonde girl frowned briefly at the couple for interrupting her, super awesome fun, singing time with their adult things, and turned back to follow the lone cloud with her striking pale blue eyes. She began humming again with a bright grin. She never bothered to notice her parents sneaking away for a small dose of their own fun. Land of Wind. At around the same time in Sunagakur, the shinobi village protecting Land of Wind, one 8-year-old Sabaku no Temari was walking down a street with her family. She had dirty blonde hair done up in 4 separate ponytails, giving her a unique hairstyle easily recognizable by many. She wore a simple but expensive-looking dark blue kimono that brought out her teal eyes and she was carrying a small ornate fan in the sash. It was a memento of her deceased mother. Sabaku no Karura passed away after giving birth to her youngest brother, Gara. Temari still never forgave her father along with the 2 elders of the village council for the circumstances that led to her beloved mother's death. On her left was her 7-year-old brother, Konkuro. He had brown hair, wore a simple t-shirt and cargo shorts, and he had a nice face. He would have an easy time getting women to notice him in the future if she didn't have to wonder about his growing obsession with creepy puppets and makeups. On her right was her brownish red-haired father, the Yondaime Kazekage of this village in his full Kazekage robes. Despite his somewhat short stature, there was no denying the power that radiated from him. His ability to draw out and control gold dust from anywhere in the environment around him was the only reason the village hadn't gone bankrupt in the years since its massive losses in the Second Great War. All this was also in spite of the Wind Daimyo beginning to send more missions to their current ally, Konoha, due to its lower rates. Next to her father on the other side was her youngest brother who just turned 6, Gara. He was basically a mini version of the Kazekage, with short and shaggy dark red hair and the same blank expressions on their faces. They even shared the same black rings around their light green eyes, making them look somewhat like raccoons. He wore a simple black full-body suit with a white tunic draped over his right shoulder and wrapped around his waist. He also carried a small gourd, full of his near-sentient sand, on his back. Everyone on the street gave the family a wide berth. Temari knew it wasn't out of respect for the family, who were basically royalty in this village. It was because they feared Gara due to the fact that he was the host of the Aikibi, or one-tailed beast, named Shukaku. At the urgings of the elders and the council, the cage tried to increase the quality of the village's shinobi force to attract more business from the Wind Lord by sealing the Ikibi into Gaara still in his mother's womb. This led to complications during the childbirth, resulting in Karura passing away as she held the tiny and frail Gaara. Temari gritted her teeth at the memory. Since her mother's death, the family became broken and dysfunctional. Temari and Kankuro barely managed a tiny semblance of a sibling relationship while living in constant fear of their youngest brother's occasional psychotic episodes. Their father became cold and distant, deciding to focus all of his attention on the village instead of his children. The worst off from that death was Gaara himself, however. Due to his sentient sand controlled by the Ikibi inside him, other people feared him and kept away from him. At first, Gaara wanted to make friends, but his sand kept accidentally hurting and killing some people. The longer this went on, the more desperate the red-haired boy got until he was finally broken some time ago by the betrayal of his caretaker, his mother's brother Yoshimaru, the only one to ever show him compassion in his lonely existence. From what Temari knew of that event, their uncle tried to kill Gaara out of revenge for his sister and, upon failing, he told the little boy that his mother hated him, cursing him throughout the childbirth until she died, and that his own father ordered the assassination attempt. That was what broke Gaara's hold on his sanity, and he had his sand crush his uncle to death. He then swore to live only for himself and went around validating his existence by killing at will. Since then, the village feared and hated him even more. Temari let out a sigh. How did her family become this up? She didn't even understand the reason for this walk together. They rarely did anything remotely family-like since her mother's death. She hated her father, but wouldn't go against his wishes, so that was why she was walking among them, ignoring the villagers' stares. Out of nowhere, she heard several soft thuds. What was that? She looked to her right to see some kunais embedded into Gaara's suddenly raised sand wall, their sharp tips inches from his face. He wasn't expecting that and suddenly screamed in surprise and rage. His sand then flared up and quickly shot for a rooftop close to the Sabaku family. In response, the cage immediately shoved Temari and Kankuro into a nook between two buildings with a muttered warning to stay there. Gaara's shrill screams continued to fill the air as everyone around them panicked and immediately retreated into their buildings or hiding spots. The last thing Temari saw before entering the nook was Gaara's sand dragging a surprised Suna shinobi down off the roof of a nearby building by his leg, his face frozen in terror. The blonde girl noticed offhandedly that the cage had already taken his stance calmly, almost too prepared for this sudden attack. It was as if he had been expecting this. As she hid in the nook with Kankuro with her whole body trembling at the rising killing intent in the air, she instinctively wrapped her arms around her similarly trembling brother in a feeble attempt at protection. It wasn't long until Gaara's screams stopped. After a moment of hearing the soft sounds of shifting sand and groaning, the two children almost considered peeking out of the nook to see what was happening. That notion was immediately shot to hell. Loud and blood-curdling screams of terror and agony filled the air, and the two poor children trembled even more. Temari could smell the scent of urine coming from Kankuro, but she paid it no mind. She wouldn't blame him since she was about to piss herself in terror too. Suddenly a sickening ripping sound was heard even over the shrill screaming, and there was a wet thump somewhere. One more incident of such disgusting noise followed another few seconds later. The agonized screams were no more by this point, so the third ripping sound, longer and even more revoltingly wet this time, was burned into Temari's memory forever with total clarity. Trembling, she finally spared a glance at what she could see outside the nook. There was nothing but an empty and dusty street from what she could see. She would regret her decision to look outside a moment later when she saw an apparently discarded corpse suddenly land in front of the nook with a wet thump as if it was a gift to the children trapped inside. Only that it wasn't a whole person. His left arm was missing, leaving behind a bloody socket, and his body was ripped in half at the waist, allowing her to see the inside spilling out. She also easily noted his spinal cord with some tendrils of nerve sticking out at its torn end, as if they were searching for the other half of the body. Despite this being only a half of the body, there was so much dark red blood pooling under the remains, soaking into the dusty dirt covering the street. However, the most horrific thing she saw was the frozen look of terror on his face with sand dribbling out of his wide-open mouth and nostrils, as if he had seen pure evil itself. Taking this sight in, she finally let her bladder control go and opened her mouth wide in a silent scream as her body instinctively prevented her from making any sound in pure self-preservation. The last thing she remembered before fainting due to the stress of this horror were seeing the glitter of gold dust floating from the ground as her father apparently prepared to subdue Gaara. The last thing she heard in the darkness enveloping her somewhat lovingly was her youngest brother's insane cackling. Somewhere in an abandoned laboratory in Land of the Sea. Oi, Dadar, okay. Wake, was all the 12-year-old Mitarashi Anko heard through the fogginess of her consciousness as she slowly woke up. She felt some light slapping on her right cheek. Her light brown eyes hurt as she opened them slowly to see a dim light directly overhead. She could barely make out two moving outlines at her sides. Wah, was all she could manage to say before she was struck silent by her sudden inability to move her limbs. Don't worry, we'll get you out of this. Just remain calm. One of the two outlines spoke in a soft feminine voice. Why should we? She's that traitor's whore, we should just cut her throat and be done with it. The other outline growled in an angry male voice before the female hushed him harshly. Wait, what? Where's Sensei? Last thing I remember was when I was leaving with him on our training trip. Anko thought as she tried to get up again only to be restrained by something. She shifted her head down for a look at her body. What she saw shocked her so much she shrieked loudly. She found herself completely and strapped to a cold metal table, her arms and legs restrained in a spread eagle fashion. She panicked as she strained and failed to cover herself up instinctively. So complete was her terror that she failed to notice that her body looked more grown up compared to when she left with her sensei. Get her something to cover up now. The female outline hissed at her male counterpart. Why should a traitor care about her mod? Was all the man retorted before the female struck him hard on his masked face. It was a thunderous crack echoing through the large room, and it actually made Anko pause briefly in her struggling. That was an order. Is that understood? The female's whisper was low and deadly. Obviously the male outline responded with a nod since the woman continued even when Anko didn't hear any vocal reply. After you find something for her, do not say a single word for the rest of this mission or I will have you up on insubordination. The female ground out through gritted teeth over the young girl's continued whimpering. The stunned male silently bowed and left Anko's line of sight. The young girl continued to whimper and struggle at the restraints even as the female-voiced outline tried to shush her gently while working to free her. After a long minute of struggling, Anko was finally freed of her restraints. She then immediately curled up into a fetal ball and began to sob loudly with the female outline trying to soothe her with a gentle hand on her back. At this point, the male returned with an old discarded blanket found somewhere else in the lab. He then quickly left the immediate area to stand guard while his female squad leader spoke to the young girl. After what seemed to be hours, but actually just a few minutes of crying, the purple-haired girl finally regained her composure somewhat and stopped trembling, feeling less exposed with the blanket covering her. She slowly sat up to take a glance around and saw that she was in a large experiment room, apparently abandoned if papers strewn about and missing equipment were any indication. Even in the dim lighting, she could make out 9 other tables just like the one she was found lying on, and each had a corpse strapped to it. All of them apparently died not too long ago and were beginning to show effects of decomposition. Was she the only one who survived whatever experimentation she went through? If that was the case, why was she left behind? Her eyes finally adjusted to the dim light and she took a good look at her female rescuer. Her savior turned out to be a Konoha Anbu. The taller masked woman was wearing a dark blue armored and sleeveless outfit, showing her bare upper arms with a tattoo on each shoulder denoting her as an Anbu and a captain of a squad respectively. She had beautiful long purple hair somewhat lighter in hue compared to her own purple hair. Finally, Anko noted this Anbu's mask to be shaped and painted like a cat's face. She took a shuddering breath, resolving to figure out what happened to her. Neko-san, I don't know what's going on. Where am I? Anko forced the words out of her throat, hoarse and dry from her panic a few minutes ago. The cat-masked Anbu seemed to take a moment to consider her response. Before we start on that, I need you to answer a couple questions honestly. I'm afraid what you say now will affect what's going to happen to you from here on. I hope for your sake that you're innocent in this whole thing, she began in an even tone. Anko grew more confused but nodded anyway. First, what is your name and age? Mitarashi Anko. I'm 9. Anko stated quickly, and the older woman was taken aback at that reply. She already knew who this girl was, so no surprise there. However, Anko definitely did not have the body of a 9-year-old from what she glimpsed earlier. This girl had already begun developing her bust and hips, plus there was an odd mark on the left side her neck. However, the Anbu didn't sense any sign of lying. Okay, Anko-chan, what was the last thing you remember? She inquired, trepidation clear in her voice. I was on the road with Orochimaru-sensei. We just left Konoha in the middle of the night a few days ago. Neko was absolutely stunned to hear this. If this was true, this meant that this girl had the last 3 years of her life wiped out. She had to ask one more question and she'd decide if she would have to kill this young girl right now, or take her back to Konoha for more questions. When you left, did Orochimaru ever say anything about why he was suddenly leaving? We know it was a last-minute departure. Did you get an explanation? She asked with a slight edge in her voice as she subconsciously slipped her right hand into her leg holster for a kunai. Anko was puzzled at the lack of honorific for her sensei but paid it no mind. Sensei said that he was taking me with him on a long-term training trip and told me we were leaving at that time because he just felt like it. It was typical of him, so I didn't think much of it. Why do you ask? Did something happen to Sensei? Has he been captured and experimented on too? Sensing no malice from Anko as she heard genuine concern in these rapid questions, the Anbu let out a silent sigh of relief and moved her hand away from the kunai to put it on one of the young girl's hands. Anko-chan, I'm sorry, but there's no easy way to say this and I'm just going to let it all out now. You'll learn more about this while we escort you back to Konoha. The night you left with Orochimaru, he betrayed the village. He was caught doing inhumane experiments on kidnapped villagers and shinobi. He then escaped from Hokage-sama and Jiraiya-sama, and must have taken you along at the very last minute. He then apparently fed you lies about his reasons for leaving. If you had admitted knowing about his betrayal at any point up till now, I'd have killed you right now for treason instead of simply questioning you. The cat-masked Anbu spoke, her heart breaking as she watched the young teen's face change from confusion to shock, then to absolute betrayal. She had to continue before she lost her resolve. That's not all. He apparently thought of you as an experiment, not his student, because he used you in whatever this was. This room is part of a laboratory complex that the intelligence division believed to have belonged to Orochimaru. We were sent to investigate here and that's how we found you. You're the only one alive in this entire place. Anko's expression continued to break down as her light brown eyes began to leak tears nonstop. Lastly, it's been 3 years since Orochimaru's betrayal. You're not 9, you should be around 12 now. The Anbu quickly got out as she watched Anko's spiral into total despair with sympathy. The young girl couldn't believe it. Her sensei, the one she looked up to and admired for years, used her and threw her aside like a piece of trash. She lost 3 years of her life. Worst of all, she's been associated with a traitor and she now felt dirty and tainted. After a few minutes of trembling and sobbing, she turned her despair into pure and unrestrained rage. "I'm going to kill that son of a," she suddenly cried out at the top of her lung, unable to bear the pain of what felt like red-hot fire growing throughout her body as she clutched futilely at the strange mark on her neck. She slumped back onto the table and started thrashing all over it in pure agony. The shocked Anbu tried to hold her down and immediately stuck 3 of her fingers into the girl's mouth, preventing her from biting her tongue off in this pain. She then noticed the strange mark on the girl's neck glowing red and it seemed to be wriggling around a little. Another loud scream of agony ripped through the abandoned base and the sea surrounding it. Kanahagakure, the Hyuga compound. The large Hyuga clan meeting hall was where the elders and leaders of both main and branch families met to discuss any issue about the clan or the village. Right now, it was filled to near full capacity with many members of both branches awaiting news about a special event happening now. The young clan heiress Hyuga Hinata was one of the many members kneeling properly on the well-polished main floor, her hands clenching tightly at the fabric of her richly appointed lavender kimono as she willed herself not to run away from the harsh scrutiny of her older relatives. The reason why she was nervous was because she was left alone, away from her parents who usually protected her from those that hated her shyness and gentleness. These were traits apparently unbecoming of a Hyuga heiress in the eyes of the more arrogant and prideful members of the clan. Ever since Hinata was born, all she knew was scorn from most of the clan's main branch for her kind nature. All Hyuga clan members were supposed to be strong and take pride in their clan being arguably the most powerful in the village, always competing with the Uchiha clan for that position. The fact that she hadn't shown the required amount of clan pride was a point of offense for the older Hyugas. Instead, she preferred to see herself as equals with others, including the branch members. This was a sore subject for many, especially when a branded branch member named Neji was clearly the clan's rising prodigy, not her or any one of the other main branch members. Meanwhile, the Uchiha clan head Fugaku already had a talented child in Itachi, who was just promoted to Anbu at age 10 and would make captain rank before long. The only solace Hinata got from the constant harassment by the entire clan she might be in charge of one day was her mother and father. Her mother loved her unconditionally and allowed her to be who she wanted to be. Her father, while stern in public, cared for her deeply and refused to take the elders' negative words about her to heart. She believed that she would survive even the most horrid treatment as long as she had the love and support of her parents. This day was grating on her already low self-confidence, however. Who knows, maybe this new child will replace that weak girl and we can finally have a proper heiress. She'll be branded and thrown in with the branch members she apparently adores so much. One elder was overheard speaking somewhat loudly. Several branch members in earshot, including young Neji and his father, frowned. This cruel banter was only a small part of all Hinata had to hear throughout the day, and her resolve was starting to break. However, she had to remain strong for her parents, who were currently occupied with giving birth to a new child. She knew she would be rewarded for her perseverance with having a younger sister to love and grow up with. She also hoped the bleak news about her beloved mother's condition would improve soon. Finally, after what seemed like eternity, the main doors to the meeting hall slowly opened to reveal one Hyuga Hiyashi, Hinata's father. The entire hall fell silent with his presence, since being the powerful head of the clan demanded that respect. Hinata almost jumped up in delight, and had to work to keep her composure as a proper Hyuga in front of the others. Any hope of this being a happy occasion was shattered when she saw something wrong in his grim expression. It can't be, oh, please don't let it be true. Hiyashi was feeling numb and broken on the inside, despite keeping up the charade of a powerful man on the outside. He had known that there would be complications with this childbirth due to forewarnings by many doctors, and were prepared for whatever could happen. However, he hoped with every fiber of his being that his beloved wife would survive the childbirth and they would be welcoming a healthy baby girl into this world together. The baby, now named Hanabi, did survive and was in perfect health. However, Hyuga Hitomi did not live through the process. Hiyashi had to allow himself a long few minutes to shed his tears over his wife's covered body and regain his composure. It would not do him any good to look weak in front of the other main branch members, now that he needed to be stronger than ever for his two beloved daughters. Sometimes he wondered if he was truly in control of the clan, rather than the elders who tried to run things from behind the scene. As he stood in the doorway, he spared a glance at his eldest daughter, and his resolve almost shattered into a million pieces as he watched the painful realization slowly creep up on her face, with her pale lavender-tinted eyes widening and becoming watery. However, she hadn't allowed any tear to escape yet. He would have been proud of her for being able to keep up a strong appearance this long if the situation didn't require the opposite reaction, in his opinion, which was to let it all out and fall into a sobbing heap. He would allow her that chance soon. I bring you mixed news. We have given birth to a very healthy infant. Our newest daughter's eyes are excellent and she will be a strong member of this clan. She shall be called Hanabi, and it is my hope that this clan will help her grow into an outstanding individual. The clan head spoke with a hint of fatherly pride, but there was no happiness in his voice. No one in the room had said anything or moved to congratulate him. They were obviously sensing there was more to this. He continued. However, due to complications during childbirth, my wife Hyuga Hitomi passed away peacefully in her sleep just after she had enough time to hold Hanabi in her arms and name her. The room remained deathly silent. Only one sound could be heard, and it was coming from Hinata. She was slowly grinding her teeth with trembling eyes, and her hands were now clutching desperately at the fabric of her kimono as she was trying to keep her composure for a while longer. With this sad news, there will be no celebration, and I wish to retire with my daughters to our house to grieve in privacy for the rest of the day. Hiyashi finished with a tone that left no room for objections. He gestured for Hinata to rise from her kneeling position and allowed her to walk past him as he closed the doors. The entire room then broke into whispers. My daughter, you may go ahead. I will retrieve your new sister and join you soon. Hiyashi spoke with as much affection he could spare in his tone. Hinata did not object as they split up, and she quickly picked up her pace toward their house. Hiyashi arrived a few minutes later with a tiny bundle in his arms to hear loud sobs and wails filling the house's common area. After a brief second of searching, he found his eldest daughter kneeling on the floor by the living room table. Her head was buried in her arms, resting on top of it as she continued to cry loudly, her tears wetting her kimono that became loose and disheveled from apparently running the rest of the way here. As if sensing the mood, the little bundle in Hiyashi's arms named Hanabi began to wail loudly too. Sighing painfully, the father of two could do nothing but take his seat by Hinata with a soothing hand on her back as he allowed a few tears to run down his cheeks as well. Uzumaki Naruto, 8 years old, was taking a leisurely walk through the quiet walkways of the clan's district, admiring the beautiful full moon in all its glory on this night. He was heading home to his crappy apartment from the Nara compound, the residence of one of his close friends, Nara Shikamaru. He had been invited over for dinner with the Naras and to play several shogi matches afterward with the pineapple-haired young heir. The blonde found it hilarious to see his incredibly lazy friend, a bona fide genius, be both fascinated and frustrated by his unconventional tactics, even though he ended up losing each match anyway. He considered it a victory on his part if he forced the pineapple-haired lazy to take his famous thinking pose, in which he sat still with eyes closed and his hands together in an odd gesture, during the match. Smiling fondly at the memory of Shikamaru, Naruto wondered how he managed to turn his life around quickly and made friends so soon after that fateful night. Despite Inoichi's best efforts, he still remembered everything, every drop of spraying blood, the sound of his wrist tearing open with the jagged blade of the rusty and discarded kunai he found in an alley, and his surrogate grandfather crying over his bloodied body. He had no idea how, but he knew as soon as he woke up that the memories planted in his head were fakes and the real ones remained. The fake events were just foreign objects in his mind that he recognized immediately. Naruto could have thrown a huge fit with the Hokage for messing with his head, but he understood why upon seeing his surrogate grandfather's anxious face. The third simply wanted the young boy to be well and happier. He then did a better acting job than the Hokage ever did to assuage the old man's fears about his mental state. After the third left the room, Naruto then spent all day in the hospital bed thinking about what happened the night before, and decided to push down the pain and loneliness just a while longer for his surrogate grandfather's sake. The crushing depression he felt about what he attempted didn't make that decision easy, though. He wondered how to even begin, and it wasn't long until he remembered the tall and blonde ponytailed man he saw in his fake memories. It was soon after he was released that he ran into the same man around the village and found his name to be Yamanaka Inoichi. He was then quickly introduced to the man's daughter. Yamanaka Ino became quite important to him quickly. In fact, he honestly thought he would have gone back to try to finish the job for the final time if he hadn't met her just in time. It also probably helped his fragile mental state at that time that he developed a small crush on her because he enjoyed her genuine cheerfulness and playful nature compared to the fake smiles he used to display in the past. They became fast friends and he was introduced soon after to Shikamaru and the eternally jolly, as long as the word fat wasn't heard, Akamichi Choji. The four of them got along great even though they annoyed each other with Ino's bossiness, Shikamaru's laziness, Choji's over-the-top gentleness, and Naruto's pranks. He remembered being scared out of his wits when he was first invited over for dinner with the three clans when they gathered for their bi-monthly dinner party. After some prodding from his friends, and Ino's use of force, he finally relented to the invitation. To say it was an eye-opening experience to eat dinner with other friendly people was as much an understatement as saying one Hatake Kakashi liked porn a tiny bit. Naruto's social ineptness, especially his poor table manners, endeared him to the clans, and they took it upon themselves to beat some etiquettes and common senses about society into him whenever he came for over with any of his friends. Yamanaka matriarch Kana and Nara matriarch Yoshino especially made sure he was well educated, much to his hidden chagrin. Choji's clan at least made sure he was well fed. Thanks to their hard work, he turned out to be a genuinely bright and friendly individual who had no issue with anyone as long as they didn't cause him any trouble. In the years since meeting those three kids and their clans, the blonde's quality of life improved considerably and he found himself genuinely happy these days, despite still enduring the hatred of most of the village. Despite all that, it still took him a long time to truly pull himself out of the depression and guilt that came with trying to take his own life. But he felt lately that part of his life was finally over, and he could say that awful memory was just that, a memory, and he honestly could not imagine why he even considered it in the first place. To think, all it took was a curious girl declaring, "Let's play," to pull him from the very edge of the abyss. Pulling himself out of his thoughts, Naruto noticed he was near the Hyuga compound and gulped loudly. He never liked the entrance guard's white pupil-less eyes following his every movement as he walked past, stony expressions seemingly forever chiseled onto their faces. He wondered if the cute girl he met earlier in the year lived inside this compound. 3 months ago, Naruto grunted loudly as he found himself tackled to the dusty ground of the neighborhood playground by an overenthusiastic Ino as she made to tag him. "Ow, take it easy on me, Ino-chan. Where in the rules did it say it was okay for you to tackle someone in the middle of a simple game of tag?" he yelled from under his friend's weight. Ino smirked as she stood and smoothed over her shoulder-length platinum blonde hair to make it less disheveled. She was wearing a purple t-shirt with white capris. "Where in the rules did it say it wasn't allowed?" she shot back impishly as she lightly dusted herself off. Naruto had no retort for that and resorted to annoyed murmurings about new rule forbidding Ino-chan from ever playing. His fellow blonde just giggled cutely before she noticed the time, and it was getting late. "Naruto, I have to get home to help mommy out. You gonna be okay? She got a bright smile and a nod from the blonde prankster, and then left after a quick hug goodbye. When she disappeared, Naruto let out a sigh with a small blush as he remained unable to contemplate just what the cute blonde girl was to him exactly. He knew they were friends for certain, but he also felt slightly closer to her than he was with their two male friends. He hoped he'd get answers one day, if they ever came. I guess I'll go home and treat myself to some ramen cups. Wait, that's not so bad. He exclaimed with a picture of a ramen cup in each eye and drool coming out a corner of his mouth as he realized this lucky development. Before he left the playground though, he heard scuffling in the bushes nearby. Curious, he decided to check out the disturbance and stepped carefully into the bushes. As he got closer, he heard several boys' boisterous voices and a whisper quiet girl's frightened voice. Forcing his way through the leaves, he stumbled upon a group of 3 boys ganging up on a small and timid girl with short indigo hair. He saw that she was wearing a simple black training outfit and was quite cute, but what his eyes quickly locked onto were her beautiful white eyes tinted with a hint of lavender. They were wide and trembling with fear. All of her would-be bullies turned to the new annoyance. What? Don't bother us and beat it, shrimp. We're just asking this prissy Hyuga why she thought her clan is superior over the rest of us. The largest of the 3 boys tried to dismiss Naruto with a lazy wave. The blonde would have none of that, and he sure as hell wasn't going to take having his height be made fun of. He let out a battle cry and launched into the group, smashing a fist into the nose of the apparent leader. A few minutes later found poor Naruto bruised and winded as he laid spread eagle on the ground with the bullies, having grown bored with him and the still untouched Hyuga girl, leaving to find something better to do. The timid girl stared at the heaving form of her blonde savior in wonder for a moment, and gathered the courage to speak up. Anyo, I'm sorry you had to jump in. It's because I'm weak. The girl forced her words out in a tiny and stuttering voice Naruto had to strain to hear. After a moment of catching his breath, the boy slowly rose to his feet and dusted himself off a little bit. After another moment of tense silence, he finally spoke up. Don't worry, strong or weak, I won't stand for seeing someone hurt if I can help it, he declared with a foxy grin and a raised fist. The girl's cheeks reddened considerably upon seeing the grin. She wanted to know more about this boy, but before she could introduce herself. Milady, it is time to return. A deep male voice echoed throughout the forest. The girl's pale eyes widened before she reluctantly bowed and left. Naruto shrugged this off and began making his way home once again, wondering about that girl. He thought she was as cute as Ino, and seemed very nice if not a little weird. It wasn't long before he forgot about the incident thanks to the power of ramen. Present. Naruto made it past the 2 Hyugas guarding the main gate and was walking along one of the compound's long perimeter walls. He realized it was already almost midnight according to the bright full moon overhead. Wow, that last shogi match took longer than I expected. As he walked in silence, he heard scraping of feet on a rough surface, likely roof tiles, but it was barely there. He doubted any other human could have heard this without chakra enhancement. He learned one day that he was blessed with heightened senses compared to other people because he was always the first to sense anything long before others noticed. He just never realized this until he was finally spending time with his peers and noticed his senses weren't exactly the norm. He also discovered at the same time that his sense of smell was about as good as a normal dog's, which he made use of this moment with a breeze blowing over him from the compound. He sniffed the air deeply and caught a slight hint of lavender. Was that a fresh shampoo scent? Naruto narrowed his blue eyes as he scanned his surroundings. The scraping and scuffling sound was getting closer, likely from the other side of the wall. Deciding to follow his instincts, he pressed his back up flat against the compound wall to try to blend into the shadow it was casting from the moonlight. The scent of lavender became stronger as the scuffling got closer. Then it all fell silent. A long minute of waiting followed with thick and stuffy tension filling the night air as Naruto rapidly shifted his eyes right and left down the length of the wall on either side. Finally, he heard a light thump as a pair of feet carefully landed onto the street from the top of the wall, and it was like an explosive tag going off right next to him since he was concentrating so hard on his hearing. He held back a pained gasp and an impulse to jump in surprise as he snapped his head to his right and glimpsed a tall figure clad entirely in a black stealth outfit. His body shifted into a ready state as his eyes searched the figure and zeroed in on a small bundle in the figure's left arm. He noted right away that it was a little girl in a white nightgown, and she was tied up tightly and gagged. Her lavender-tinted eyes were wide open with helpless terror. Few minutes ago in Hinata's bedroom, Hyuga Hinata was glad for this kind of day, a day in which the entire clan was busy entertaining a diplomat from the land of lightning's Kumogakure. Earlier in the day, the diplomats signed a tentative peace agreement with Konohagakure to help each other in certain aspects like aids, sharing some missions, and making some military concessions. That kind of dinner event kept the clan busy with preparations. A busy clan then would not harass Hinata as much, so she relished these days, which were still too few and far in between for her liking. The only things she had to worry about this day were to dress up formally, keep silent, and be composed at the large dining table, and that was it. After she took her bath with Hanabi, she put her younger sister to bed before slipping into her own futon. Her heavy eyelids began to droop with her last thoughts being of that blonde-haired boy with the gorgeous blue eyes, cute whisker marks, and that heart-stopping grin. The next moment, her pale eyes snapped wide open as she felt a rough hand cover her mouth and a sharp blade against her neck. She stared right up at the face of a large black-clad man and saw the clear message in his cold and dark eyes. Make a sound and you die. Her entire body froze at once and she couldn't breathe. So complete was her terror that she barely noticed being pulled out of her bed then tied up and gagged quickly. She only registered bits of the scenery changing as she was carried under the assailant's arm from her bedroom to the compound's rooftops, too terrified to think about anything. It was only when, upon landing on the walkway outside the compound, she locked eyes with a pair of striking blue eyes floating in the shadows by the wall nearby that she came to life. They widened in surprise and shone brightly in the moonlight, and she knew they were the same eyes she daydreamed about only a moment ago. Somehow, she felt her terror abiding, and unconsciously began to struggle. She fully realized now what was happening and decided she didn't want to be taken away from her father and sister, and would do anything to prevent that now. For some reason, she didn't want to just give up in front of these blue eyes. Naruto saw the girl begin to struggle after they locked eyes. He immediately recognized her as the indigo-haired girl he met 3 months ago and gritted his teeth. This was a bad situation and he knew he was no match for that black figure. He didn't smell a single trace of this man, a good sign of an experienced shinobi. He would die before he even got the first syllable out if he tried to alert someone, but he had to save that girl. Naruto would be the first out of anyone to know that if she disappeared, she would suffer greatly. Having been through so much already by now, he wasn't going to allow that to happen to someone else if he could help it. As he watched carefully from his hiding spot, he noticed the shinobi was growing frustrated with the girls struggling, and was getting quite distracted. This was his chance as he took a steady breath and reached for something he happened to glimpse lying on the ground by the wall. The black-clad man was growing irritated with the Hyuga girl struggling in his hold. Since when did she instantly grow a backbone? He gathered from observing his primary target at the dinner earlier tonight that she was a cowardly and submissive girl. He thought she was going to be the easier of the 2 Hyuga females to kidnap for his secret mission in an effort to acquire more Kekkei Genkei carriers for Kumogakure. His disguise as a diplomat was a ruse in order to study the security of the Hyuga compound up close so he could attempt the snatch after he returned to his hotel room. What would happen to the young girl and the shitstorm that'd come when news of this got out, he didn't care. He was happy to serve the rakeage, and could almost taste the glory and fame that came with being the one to bring the famed Byakugan to his village. Whop! That was the last thought he had before he heard a loud fleshly smack and felt pure agony like no other, even in his long career as a shinobi, fill his entire body all at once, pain so great he almost swallowed his tongue in shock. He barely noticed that this ungodly pain originated mostly from a certain pair of balls hanging between his legs. The last thing he saw before his eyes rolled up toward the top of his head was a long piece of stick wedged tightly between his legs. Why is it there? A young blonde boy almost had to wince in sympathy as he finished taking a full-strength swing with the long and thick stick that he found nearby into the man's completely unguarded family jewels from behind. The nin slowly sank to his knees with a strained groan as his arms instinctively reached for his prized treasure, dropping the tied-up Hyuga girl in the process. Naruto was waiting for this and caught her before she hit the ground. At that moment, they locked eyes again and he saw tears of relief and joy dribbling from the girl's beautiful eyes. He ripped the gag out of her mouth and she immediately buried her face into the boy's chest with happy cries of thanks. His cheeks warmed up at the praise and close contact. However, he had no time to think on this since the man would recover quickly. It's all right. I'll get help for you, the blonde assured as he used some effort to carry the tied-up girl as far as he could from the man, who was still in a quivering heap. He then inhaled in all the air his considerably large lungs were able to take. Ooey, that guy in black's touching the pretty Hyuga girl in weird places. Could be heard echoing throughout the entire village of Konohagakure. In an unrelated matter, all fathers of young girls suddenly felt compelled to check in on their precious daughters at this time, just to be sure. Hinata was stunned into silence with mixed feelings about this. She was blushing at being called pretty, but she was also embarrassed by the possible misunderstandings about having been touched in weird places, whatever they were. Naruto only had to wait one whole second before he heard the thunderous crash of someone smashing through a solid wall. That was immediately followed by a man's loud and terrifying roar of pure primal rage from inside the compound walls. Where is my daughter? I will slaughter you like an animal. The entire compound lit up at once, and Naruto had to snicker. He figured something like this would happen after years of dealing with Ino's father and his overprotective nature. Apparently, this was something only a father and a daughter shared. With his sensitive hearing, he heard thundering footsteps zeroing on this location fast. Good, he and the girl should be able to get out of this uninjured. You goddamn brat. I'll kill you. Startled, Naruto quickly turned around and instinctively pushed the tied-up girl onto the ground behind him. He only had enough time to see the man in black standing on shaking legs, with one hand clearly wrapped around his abused nuts and the other outstretched in front, before he felt a small twinge in his chest and heard a wet squelch. He then heard the girl cry out in terror from behind. Why was she screaming like that? At that moment, a tall and enraged pale-eyed man with long straight black hair leapt over the wall and landed between the two children and the surprised black-clad man. If it wasn't for the seriousness of the situation, it would have been hilarious to see a man of high nobility standing barefoot and bare-chested on the walkway in his white silk pajama pants, shredded and dirtied by his alternative to using a door just a moment ago. Not to mention his wild and disheveled hair. You. The new arrival growled out wrathfully as he caught sight of the kidnapper. Before the black-clad man could get a word out, the Hyuga man snarled and charged at the assailant with his Byakugan blaring. In under a second he struck multiple times with fatal precision as all chakra-enhanced strikes were aimed at the forehead, throat, lungs, kidneys, and heart. It was all over so quickly when the black-clad man fell, already dead, into a broken heap with so much dark blood pooling underneath that the moon reflected off it easily. Naruto had to admire the way that powerful man quickly dealt with the kidnapper. This man also had to be the girl's father too, from the relief clearly displayed in his eyes upon seeing the girl safe and sound, if only tied up for the moment. Though the blonde couldn't understand why they changed to extreme alarm upon shifting their gaze to him. Before he could say anything in greeting, his head instantly became light, his eyelids felt heavy, and it felt like he was falling slowly to the right. He didn't understand this, he should have been perfectly all right. Was this why the girl behind him was still crying out in anguish? He watched rather than felt as his body hit the ground in slow motion, first with his right knee, then his hip followed by the shoulder, and finally his temple tapped against the cold pavement of the walkway. He couldn't fathom why he wasn't able to move his limbs anymore now. Finally, after a moment of panicked confusion, he used all his waning strength to glance down at his twining chest and finally found the cause. A small kunai was embedded into the very center of it, almost up to the handle, courtesy of the black-clad man before his brutal death. It was this damn thing. I need to pull it out, he thought, clearly going into total shock. But no matter what he tried, he couldn't muster the strength to move even a finger. He needed to remove this bothersome thing so the girl wouldn't have to cry any longer than necessary. His eyelids drooped even lower, despite his best efforts to keep them open. He felt himself being gently turned and laid on his back. He finally took a good look at the Hyuga man that moved him. He looked like a stern and stoic man. However, at this time, he could see clear concern in the man's pale eyes with the veins bulging around them. He also could hear the man's quickened breathing, apparently trying to work on his grievous injury. He also glimpsed the tear-streaked face of the cute Hyuga girl he just saved standing behind the man, apparently freed from her bindings now. Please, you need to stay alive. The pale-eyed girl cried out in anguish as her entire body trembled at the sight of so much blood gushing from the young blonde boy's chest. That was when it struck Naruto as his breathing became shallow and his throat began to flood with blood, making each labored breath that escaped sound like a wet gurgle. His wound was definitely fatal. There was no coming back from this one, he was sure. He didn't even feel anything as he watched the man quickly pull the kunai out with a wet snick, ripped his shirt off, and wadded it up to apply pressure to the gushing wound. The man then shouted something unintelligible at some far-off location, apparently addressing other people that must have arrived recently. Naruto's last sight was the heart-wrenching vision of the indigo-haired girl's tear-streaked and grief-stricken face, still desperately imploring for him to stay alive with her beautiful lavender-tinted eyes. His last thought came before total blackness took him. Damn it, I'm not coming back from this one, and this time I don't want to go. Talk about irony. I wanted to be able to grow up and protect my friends, but I guess I won't be able to do that now. At least I saved that cute girl. That was better than most people could do. Hinata and Hiashi, get any of our physicians here now, and make haste. I want this child kept alive. Hiashi shouted at the group of Hyugas gathering nearby as he kept the pressure on this child's gaping wound, with no trace of his usual composure present. Some of them obeyed and left in search of an available medic inside the compound. The others were reluctant. Hiashi-sama, we shouldn't treat him. Don't you know who he is? We can finally get rid of this brat. An older Hyuga man was cut off as he choked under Hiashi's impressive killing intent directed toward him. Finish that word and I will gladly have Hokage-sama execute you for breaking the law. This brat saved my daughter from being kidnapped and most likely a fate worse than death at the risk of his life. I owe it to him to keep him alive. Enough of your bullshit and be gone with your ineptitude. He roared at the trembling Hyugas, his Byakugan blaring with promise of a painful fate for anyone who dared to object further. Only his younger identical twin brother opted to step up to the boy's body in an effort to help him out. Brother, his blood flow is slowing down too quickly and his chakra network is fading. What can we do now? Hazashi spoke softly as he kneeled down and checked the boy over with his Byakugan. Hiashi could only respond with a frustrated growl as he desperately tried to keep the boy alive even a second longer by increasing pressure on the wound. Hinata barely noticed her frantic father and uncle next to her as she continued to stare down at the blonde boy's still and paling form. She was completely numb inside as her tears stopped. She couldn't understand why this had to happen to someone as kind and brave as him. If she hadn't been so weak, this boy then wouldn't have had to sacrifice himself to save her worthless self. She stared down at her trembling hands. It felt like she had the boy's blood on them, even though they were perfectly clean. Before she could spiral lower into total despair, she heard an unnatural yelp of surprise each from her father and uncle. Before she could glance up to see what happened, she was yanked backward by her nightgown's collar, her father's blood-soaked hand clenching tightly onto it. Landing some distance away from the boy's body, all three were shocked to see bright red charca burst from the body and surround it as if it was protecting the boy. Hiyashi and Hazashi had to deactivate their Byakugan lest they became blinded by the dense and pure chakra radiating from the boy. They also had to resist the familiar and overpowering presence in the atmosphere as the other Hyugas scrambled to get away from the body as quickly as possible. The clan head heard his daughter cry out in shock. "Father, what is this? Is it hurting him?" Hinata exclaimed with none of her usual stutter, pulling hard at her father's death grip on her collar in an instinctive effort to protect her savior from whatever it was. Her father shushed harshly to get her to calm down a bit, and took a moment to stare at what was happening before them. He shared an astonished expression with Hazashi before replying. "No, it seems to be healing the wound as if it was nothing," he murmured in amazement as he observed the young child's gaping wound beginning to close. Inside Naruto's mindscape, Naruto opened his eyes to find himself lying on his back, submerged up to his ears in shallow water. He quickly sat up in confusion and clutched at his chest, only to see no sign of the wound he supposedly suffered, and his shirt somehow remained intact. He knew that was real, so why did he end up here suddenly unhurt? He had a look around and saw that he was in a long, wide, and dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch on forever into pitch-black darkness in either direction. The walls were old and crackling with large dark red and blue pipes snaking along them in odd patterns. He noted the red pipes were glowing bright red compared to the blue ones. What is this? Is this where people go when they die? Confused, he forced himself to rise and shake some of the excess water off. As he glanced at both directions the large hallway stretched into, he could feel something tugging at him a little one way. Having nothing else to go on, he decided to follow this sensation. After what seemed like hours of wading through the shallow water, the hallway suddenly opened up into an enormous room. Red and blue pipes covered nearly every inch of the walls on both sides and even the ceiling, but that wasn't what caught Naruto's attention, as he could now feel a very powerful presence in here. Walking further into the room revealed a giant set of iron bars blocking further progress into the darkness beyond. A closer inspection revealed a paper with "seal" written on it stuck high up on the center bar. He felt anxiety flowing through every single inch of his body. Something told him this was neither heaven nor hell. "You catch on quick, boy," a loud and authoritative voice boomed through the large cavern-like room. The young blonde yelped in surprise and fell back to land unceremoniously on his backside, splashing the shallow water everywhere. There was silence for a long moment before the booming voice broke into a mirthful chuckle, seemingly shaking the entire room with each exhalation. "Haha, it has been a while since I've had a good laugh. Please do not be frightened. We are in your mindscape and I wish to have a discussion with you, Uzumaki Naruto," the voice continued, rolling throughout the room like thunder. It took a moment for Naruto to regain his composure at hearing and feeling the presence beyond the iron bars. "Oh, okay, but may I ask for your name since you apparently know mine?" The young boy carefully inquired upon the mysterious presence. He heard what sounded like a pleased growl. "Respectful, I like that. I will tell you my true name soon, but for now, I'm afraid you know me by another." The darkness began to fade out and Naruto could easily make out a massive silhouette shaped like an animal towering high over him. He also noted, with some trepidation, many long tails swaying gently behind it. Two enormous crimson eyes shone brightly down at him in the darkness near the top of the silhouette. The humans out there call me Kyuubi no Kitsune. The same nine-tailed demon fox that the fourth Hokage supposedly killed, with one exception. The darkness finally faded away completely, revealing an enormous crimson demonic-looking fox with rabbit-like ears and 9 tails. It was calmly lying on the floor and facing the boy directly with its arms crossed underneath its raised head. Its eyes were still staring down at him unblinkingly. Instead, I was actually sealed within you when you were a newborn. I am the reason why you are hated by most of the ignorant idiots you've met so far in this ungrateful village. The now revealed Kyuubi finished softly as its 9 tails twitched and swayed around absent-mindedly. It was watching the boy intensely for any reaction. It took all Naruto had to keep from crapping his pants at the prospect of being face to face with the giant demon fox that the entire village feared and hated. Only reassured somewhat by the presence of the iron bars between the two, he regained his composure finally. As he gazed up at the fox, whom seemed to be waiting for what he would say, he had to take a moment and think about what to say to this powerful entity apparently trapped within him. He finally understood why the villagers hated him so much and, at first, he impulsively wanted to yell insults at the fox sitting beyond the bars for being the reason he lived a painful existence until recently. But, would that have changed anything? Whatever put the fox into him already happened, and he already lived through the worst of the villagers, anger and hatred. Plus, those same villagers were morons for even believing him to be the demon fox itself in the first place, so he had no reason to care about what they thought of him now or in the future. He could tell things would continue to improve for him as he made more friends at this rate. And what if it wasn't the fox's fault it had to be sealed into him? He already learned of one lie when all of his generation and younger were told the Kyuubi was actually killed. Right now, to him, it might not be such a bad thing having a giant entity sealed inside him. He probably got some benefits from that, right? And maybe he could make another friend in the process. At that thought, the Kyuubi's eyes widened fractionally for an instant. After taking a long moment to quell the shock of this revelation, Naruto decided there was nothing that could be done to change anything right now. He decided to ask some questions before forming an opinion about his recently discovered tenant. Thank you for not calling me a prisoner, and yes, you did get some benefits from having a giant entity sealed inside of you. The Kyuubi suddenly spoke, as if the boy's thoughts were said out loud. Naruto flinched in surprise at that, then remembered that he was in what the fox called his mindscape. It makes sense in this case. From those red pipes I see coming out from your side, you're kinda paying rent with some of your chakra, even if it was forced. The blonde replied sheepishly, pointing at the pipes lining the walls. The fox only gave a small grin, liking this human. He had a sharp mind being able to understand instantly what the pipes symbolized. So what happened that had me end up in here with you? The last thing I remember before coming here was a creepy man in black killing me for saving a girl. I certainly had no idea you've been in me all this time till now. Naruto asked, looking up at the giant fox with a head. When you were dying, I pumped some of my chakra throughout your system and it increased your healing rate exponentially. While I'm working on that, I decided to pull you into this room so we can finally meet face to face and have a discussion. It spoke with an annoyed tone on the last word, as if it was going to confront the boy about something. Naruto gulped, having a feeling he knew what the Kyuubi was pissed about. As if to signify the changing mood, the fox's massive tails began to move around a little forcefully, splashing the shallow water everywhere. Now, I would like to tell you about my end in regards to how this seal works between us. As long as I am inside you, my chakra is absorbed little by little into your body and I cannot break out of the seal at any time without killing you. The fox explained while pointing at the paper seal on the bar with one of its tails. While I'd admit I'm not too put out by that notion, I realized it's best for me to work with you and keep you alive until the end of your life this time. The reason for this is the seal connecting us both is designed so that if you died for any reason aside from old age, I die as well, and it probably would be long and painful, too. Naruto winced. The fox became more agitated as it narrowed its sinister crimson eyes at the cringing blonde, bared all of its teeth, got up on all four legs with thunderous footsteps, and its tails thrashed loudly behind it. They were raising a deafening racket in this large room. So imagine my rage when I watched you try to kill yourself 4 times in quick succession some time ago, and I desperately worked my off to keep the both of us alive. Every god damn time. The all-powerful Kyuubi roared as it punctuated the last 5 words with an intense slam of one of its powerful tails onto the floor, shaking the entire room each time and causing large waves everywhere with the shallow water. The fox's angry roar knocked the boy off his feet and blew him back several meters to tumble through the choppy water. After the outburst, the fox exhaled loudly and seemed to calm down as it returned to lying down. Naruto, while a little wary this time, slowly stood up from the calming water and shook the excess off to face his tenant again while remaining silent with a guilty expression. The Kyuubi sighed slowly and a small smirk tugged at its black lips. You're lucky that I healed you on a whim this time. After what happened, I decided I wouldn't heal your moronic ever again as long as you kept contemplating suicide. That'd mean I'm trapped inside a weak container, and I'd rather just die with you and deal with the hassle of coming back to life a few decades later. I almost considered not saving you this time, since going up against an experienced shinobi the way you are now would be considered a form of suicide by many people, myself included. The Kyuubi grinned at Naruto's annoyed scowl at being called suicidal for doing what he thought was right. Still, you did do it to rescue that human child, and you actually did not want to die, so I decided to interfere and make a deal with you. I want to help you get strong enough to keep the both of us alive, as well as protect all of your friends. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto became alarmed about the notion of making a deal with a demon, especially when it was the most powerful being in existence. He decided to make sense of something before he would decide to accept or not. Go ahead and ask your questions. The Kyuubi snickered at seeing the boy faceful at having his mind read again. Damn it. Anyway, I only have one question. Why did you attack Konoha? He asked firmly, before gulping a little as he saw the giant fox narrow its eyes angrily. Its tail shifted some as it took a deep and calming breath. Apparently it was a sore subject. A masked man with the Sharingan ripped me out of my previous container and put me under his control with that accursed Kekkei Genkai. I was then taken to your village and forced to rampage through it until your 4th Hokage came and sealed me into you, and that's how we got here. I should warn you that man apparently needed my power for something far beyond simply rampaging through some human village, at least before he was stopped and released his control over me just before I was resealed. He would likely return in the future to try and rip me out of you, and I don't need to tell you that, with this seal, would result in certain death for us, boy. The Kyuubi spoke with an angry undertone. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the prospect of being hunted in the future for what he contained. He decided to move on and worry about that later. That's all I need to know for now. I'm going to be fine with being your partner on this then. The Kyuubi was surprised at this boy's carefree attitude about making a deal with a demon, even though it wasn't really one, at least in the strictest sense of the term, in the first place. Aren't you going to ask what the terms were on this deal, at least? Fine, I'll listen to the terms. As long as none of them has you stepping out of me and going nuts on this village, they should be reasonable enough. Naruto replied as if he was wondering why they were wasting time on this. The Kyuubi rolled its eyes. I'll tell you anyway so you won't bitch at me in the future about anything that comes up. Now, your benefits in this partnership are that you receive all of my help in making you much more stronger, like a container of the Kyuubi no Kitsune should be. That includes, but is not limited to, physical training, learning to control your chakra efficiently, receiving my fire affinity and several of my own personal fire jutsu, my knowledge of tactics and strategies, genjutsu, taijutsu, kenjutsu, and the ability to control your own tailed beast transformation after you've trained long enough. I will also help you with most of the genjutsu cast upon you by dispelling them with my own charka. If you begin now and work hard, you should be strong enough to get on even ground with the strongest people I've seen by the time you reach the age of 18. The Kyuubi had to hold back a smirk at seeing the boy's expression of wonder and amazement. I have 4 terms of my own in this partnership. First, you unlock all of your senses to me so I can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel whatever you come across in the outside world since it gets boring in here. A simple agreement between us is all the intent it should take for the seal to allow me to actively link up with you. Up until now, I could only find out things about you by reading your memories. We'd also now be able to speak to each other without you having to come here every time, and you also benefit by having your senses heightened even further thanks to my own senses merging with yours. Either of us can still cut the link for some privacy if needed. Why should I care about my privacy if I'm going to trust you? Believe me, when you get older, you'll want all the privacy you can get, the fox retorted with a snicker. The blonde just his head in confusion, but shrugged. Sure, let's agree to that. It sounds like a great help for us both. The Kyuubi grinned. So be it. We should be able to link up now. Indeed, they both felt something shift slightly in the air around them, as if some unknown force just responded to their conversation non-verbally just now. Next term, I would like for you to fix this mindscape so it isn't such a shithole to live in. It only takes a little bit of concentration to be able to change anything in this place with your mind, so I'll help you with that when we have time. This will help improve your training exponentially when you come in here to train your mind and chakra while your body rests at night. Naruto immediately responded with a sharp nod, having no objection to that. Third term, this one you may have difficulty accepting, but you must do this. It's for both our sake or the deal's off, is that understood? The fox spoke with a serious gaze, and Naruto gulped. The fox's expression suddenly switched from serious to clear amusement as it held 2 fingers up. You must limit your ramen intake to only 2 times a week. It said in a sing-song voice that did not match the rows of sharp teeth as it smiled, baring them all. Naruto facepalted, clearly tricked by the serious atmosphere just a moment ago. The fox was enjoying the look of utter horror creeping up on its container's face at the prospect of actually having to eat his beloved ramen like a normal person should. What the hell was with that sudden change, fox? And why the hell do I have to cut down on the food of the gods? The fox once again bared its sharp teeth in a wide grin that looked purely demonic, and the boy involuntarily gulped. I may be viewed as a demon, but I am also based on a fox. It's my nature to enjoy jokes and tricks. You will provide plenty of entertainment by the way. The Kyuubi had to chuckle at Naruto's indignant, "Oi." Before continuing, you should be glad I'm actually allowing you to eat any. This so-called food of the gods you love and trust so much is the primary reason you're a shrimp for your age. The fox spoke bluntly, holding its right hand up to show its pointer and thumb with very little space between them, as if to denote smallness. Naruto got a tick mark on his temple at the sight. I can help you craft a strong body from here in combination with your extreme physical training, but I can only do so much without proper nutrition. It was a good thing you still occasionally visit your friends for dinner lately aside from your 5 meals of ramen every day, otherwise you'd have been a malnourished prawn at this point. The fox finished with its pointer and thumb growing even closer together to punctuate the malnourished prawn insult. Naruto developed another tick mark, and had to take a minute to calm down. Grr. Damn it. I'll do it. I'll give up on that stuff if that's what it'll take for me to get strong enough to protect my friends. The blonde declared more for himself than for the fox in front of him as if to steel his nerves in face of that horrible reality. Very good. Before we move on, I forgot to mention that I'm female, and you may call me by my given name, which is Kurama. I just wanted to clear that up since I'm getting tired of you referring to me as it. The fox now named Kurama dropped this bombshell as casually as if she was talking about the weather. What? Was Naruto's intelligent reply as he stared up at her in shock. The great fox seemed to take offense to this. Is there a problem with the most powerful entity in the world being of female nature? Kurama slowly ground out as the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Naruto straightened up, sweat pouring buckets down his face. No, ma'am. It's just that, you have such a wonderfully deep voice, so that's why I was confused. The fox rolled her eyes with a sigh at the failed flattery. It's just the way I am. Do you expect a smaller version of me to pop out from some hidden curtain and say, pay no attention to the tiny fox behind the curtain? With a squeaky voice, she muttered in a sarcastic tone, then sighed again at the boy's totally lost expression. She waved her hand dismissively. Never mind, it was just an old expression I picked up many thousands of years ago. Moving on. Naruto, this is the last term of our partnership. When I think you're powerful enough and ready, I want you to go hunt down and kill the man who took control of me and made me attack your village. I doubt you have any issue with that considering he's responsible for everything that's happened to you since then. If you succeed in that, I promise I will be content living out the remainder of your lifespan within you, and I will swear not to have anything to do with Konoha and its allies when I get out. I just don't want to be sealed into another person. Kurama finished dictating her terms and awaited the boy's reply. Before that, there's something I need to say to you. Naruto finally spoke with a serious expression after thinking a long moment. The fox was wondering what he meant when her eyes widened at what she saw. The boy was now on his knees and hands, dunking his forehead into the water to touch the floor in a classic submission posture. Kurama, I am truly sorry for that time when I tried to take my own life. While I did not know you were sealed inside me at that time, it did not excuse the fact that I could have killed you as well. It was never my desire to drag anyone else into that. Also, I want to thank you too. You saved me. Because of that, I've been able to fix myself up enough to move on and work for a better life now. Naruto spoke in his most sincere tone possible. Kurama was so stunned by this display that she didn't say anything for a minute. She finally found her voice and growled with an annoyed expression. Get up from that pose and don't ever do it again. You are my container and partner, and you will not bow down that low in submission to anyone, not even to me. Is that understood? She growled out. However, her face settled into a more gentle expression as the boy picked himself off the ground. But, you're welcome and apology accepted. The blonde boy gave her a million-watt smile as he walked up close to the bars and stuck out his right hand out between them. Deal accepted. I expect you to work me hard, Kurama-sensei. And I expect you to do me proud as my container, Uzumaki Naruto. Kurama replied as she stuck one of her giant claws out to let the boy grip it on the very tip, and they shook a little. After releasing and letting the comfortable silence settle in the air for a moment, the boy decided to say something that was on his mind. Did you do something with my memories back then? Apparently I was supposed to have these fake memories put into me so I would forget about what happened, but I knew right away and I still remembered everything anyway. The giant fox put a finger to her muzzle as she thought for a moment. I'm not quite sure about that. It may have been something to do with my chakra interfering with the effects of whatever that man with the long ponytail did to your mind. If that's the case, then, with my help, you could be immune to mental probing and torture. Another useful trait of our partnership, it seems. That got her a foxy grin from the boy. She then perked her head up and seemed to glance at something that Naruto clearly wasn't seeing. Now, I sense something is going on outside, so you should be waking up soon. I'm done healing your wound and only a few minutes have passed out there. Be careful, as you'll be weakened for a while. We will speak more about this arrangement later when you're rested up, Naruto. See you later. See you then. The blonde container replied as his waving form began to fade out. Looking at the spot where he disappeared, Kurama had to let a toothy smile grow on her face. So that was your son, Kushina. He'll surprise me many times, I'm sure. Outside with the twins and Hinata a few minutes earlier. Hiyashi, Hazashi, and Hinata found themselves the only ones standing close to Naruto's body that was currently glowing, tinting the surrounding night air in crimson color. The others already ran away in terror, screaming about a demon fox coming loose, their oh so important Hyuga pride and composure completely forgotten. The three Hyugas stayed rooted in place, staring transfixed at the beautiful but apparently deadly red chakra slowly whirling around the boy's body in a protective manner. Father, uncle, what is that? Hiyashi noticed his daughter asked that with no fear in her voice, only open curiosity. He also noted his brother stiffening uncomfortably. I am afraid I cannot tell you that, my daughter. It is a secret only this child can tell you himself. I recommend waiting on inquiring about this until you feel you have gained this boy's trust, that is if you wish to pursue a friendship with him. Hiyashi replied softly as he still kept a firm hold on her shoulder, making sure she didn't get close to the body just yet. Now then, we must prepare to greet Hokage-sama. The clan head spoke as he and Hazashi turned around and Hinata reluctantly followed suit, a little confused. Her unasked question was answered immediately when the sight of the Hokage and 6 of his Anbu escorts jumping down onto the walkway from the air greeted them. The third's face was grim as he surveyed the scene, from the broken body of the black-clad shinobi, to the 3 Hyugas, and finally to the crimson glowing body of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. What happened here? He asked calmly, but his tone did not hide his tension at seeing the Kyuubi's chakra floating around the boy's body. A few minutes of explanations brought everyone up to speed. They were also dismayed to discover the kidnapper, when one of the Anbu investigated his body, turned out to be the diplomat sent from Kumo. The Hokage rubbed his temples at the upcoming headache, as he'd have to deal with an international incident when word of this eventually reached Kumogakure. In the meantime, 3 of the Anbu were now standing guard in a triangle formation around Naruto as the crimson chakra continued to twirl around him. After a few minutes of anxious waiting, everyone noticed the red glow was beginning to fade away, and the chakra eventually shrank until it finally retreated fully into the boy's body. The Hokage and everyone else held their breaths for what seemed like eternity until they saw the boy stirring awake. The old man stepped closer until he was just out of the boy's range, with his escorts tensing into readiness. Naruto-kun, is that you? Are you okay? Groaning, Naruto opened his eyes to see the very concerned face of his surrogate grandfather. Hokage Jiji, what are you doing here? He murmured tiredly. The third let out an explosive breath of relief as he discreetly signaled his Anbu to stand down. Only Naruto would call him that, and this was definitely the same boy he came to know and care for. He'd have to put off his discussion about the red chakra, at least until he was able to get alone with the boy soon. He noted the young Hyuga girl bravely stepping up. Anyo, what's your name? Hinata asked with barely any stuttering, surprising the twin brothers a little. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. It's nice to meet you. The boy replied with a tired and sheepish smile as he sat up. Well, Naruto-kun, my name is Hyuga Hinata and I want to thank you for rescuing me once again. I'm glad you do not seem to be hurt anymore now. Hinata quietly stated before she quickly reached in for a hug. It was all Naruto could do to not jump in surprise at being suddenly hugged by someone other than Ino and her mother. After getting used to it, he thought it felt very nice and warm. Hinata, on the other hand, was blushing scarlet at such an impulsive action. Both hid their slight disappointment upon letting go of each other. I would like to see you again soon when you recover, if that is permissible with my father. Hinata shyly stated as she glanced at her father. Hiyashi nodded slightly in approval before turning to his twin brother. Hazashi, please return to the compound and inform them that all is well. Take my daughter with you as well, and guard her and Hanabi until I return. Hiyashi requested of his younger brother. He got an affirmative nod in return and turned back to Hinata.